Kassim had just stepped into Matoni Market in worn sandals and a faded shirt when a scream tore through the noise. His mother hit the dirt hard. A thick-handed creditor yanked Mama Zawadadi by her wrapper and slapped her so brutally that the basket beside her overturned, scattering tomatoes into the mud. Laughter rippled through the crowd. No one moved. No one helped. Kassim froze. For 6 years he had sent money home from glass towers and private jets, believing his mother was safe. But there she was, bleeding, trembling, and begging for mercy over a debt he had never heard of. Then she looked up, saw him through the crowd, and whispered his name like she had seen a ghost. If you came home and found the person you loved most suffering because of a secret, would you choose revenge first, or the truth? And where are you watching from today? Tell me your country and local time in the comments. If stories of justice, family, and second chances move you, subscribe and stay with us. Kassim did not think. He moved. By the time the creditor raised his hand again, Kassim had already crossed the distance between them. He caught the man's wrist in mid-air with such sudden force that the laughter around them snapped into silence. The man twisted, startled. "Who are you?" Kassim did not answer. His eyes were fixed on his mother. Mama Zawadi was on her knees in the dirt, one hand pressed to her cheek, the other trembling over the spilled vegetables that now lay crushed under sandals and cartwheels. Blood had gathered at the corner of her mouth. Her wrapper was half loosened from the struggle. And the thing that tore Kassim open was not only the bruise darkening across her face. It was the look in her eyes. Not shock, not even pain. Habit, as if humiliation had become so ordinary that her body no longer expected rescue. "Leave her," Kassim said at last, his voice low and flat. The creditor, a broad man with a scar across his chin, tried to yank his hand free. "This is not your business, stranger." Kassim tightened his grip. The man winced. Now the crowd shifted. People leaned in. A few whispered. Some stared at Kassim's worn shirt and dusty sandals with open contempt, as though poverty itself had no right to interrupt violence. She owes the creditor spat, and if she cannot pay, she will learn respect. Mama Zawadi suddenly reached up and grabbed Kassim's sleeve. "No," she whispered, panic flashing across her face. "Please, don't make it worse." That frightened him more than the slap. He released the man slowly, but not before pushing his hand away from her with a force that made him stumble back 2 steps. The creditor glared clearly, preparing to lunge again, but something in Kassim's face made him stop. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the cold control. Maybe it was the fact that poor men did not usually look at other men that way unless they had already decided exactly how far they were willing to go. "This is not finished," the creditor said, pointing at Mama Zawadi. "By sunset tomorrow she pays, or the house goes." He turned and shoved through the crowd. A few others followed him, but many remained pretending to inspect produce, pretending not to watch, pretending they had not just stood there while an old woman was beaten in public. Kassim knelt beside his mother. For one suspended second, neither of them spoke. Then Mama Zawadi lifted shaky fingers and touched his face as if she did not trust her own sight. "Kassim," she breathed. The name broke inside him. He had imagined this reunion too many times during lonely nights in penthouses above cities that never slept. In every version he arrived with gifts, with comfort, with laughter, with tears of joy, perhaps. His mother would be older, yes. Frailer, maybe, but safe, proud, protected. Not this, never this. "I'm here," he said, though the words felt too small, too late, too useless. Her eyes filled at once, not with relief alone, but with fear. "You should not have come like this," she whispered. He frowned. "Like what?" "Without telling anyone." Before he could answer, she tried to gather the scattered vegetables from the dirt. Kassim stopped her gently. Leave them. We cannot leave them. They fell in the mud. We cannot waste them. That was when he understood the depth of what he was seeing. His mother, who had once insisted guests eat first, even when the pot was nearly empty, was trying to rescue bruised tomatoes from mud because losing them mattered. Not symbolically. Practically. They mattered because she needed them. Kassim rose without a word, bought the entire remaining basket from a nearby vendor who stared at him in surprise, then lifted his mother carefully to her feet. The crowd parted now, a little too late, a little too quietly. As they walked away from the market, Mama Zawadi leaned heavily on him. He felt every sharp angle of her body through the thin fabric on her shoulders. She had become frighteningly light. The road to the old house felt longer than any road Kassim had traveled in 6 years. He had crossed continents in private aircraft, closed deals in mirrored towers, sat across from presidents, ministers, men whose signatures moved markets. Yet walking beside his injured mother through the red dust of Matoni felt harder than all of it. Children stopped playing to stare. Women at roadside stalls lowered their eyes. An old man at a tea stand gave Kassim a long look full of recognition he did not voice. Kassim noticed it. So did his mother. "Don't speak to anyone," she murmured. His jaw tightened. "Why, just don't." That answer stayed with him until they reached the house. And when they did, something inside him went cold. The home where he had grown up seemed to have shrunk into suffering. The roof sagged. Rust bit through the sheets of corrugated metal. One corner of the veranda had collapsed and been propped up with crooked timber. The walls, once washed in bright lime, had faded into peeling grey. The front step was cracked. The door hung slightly off its hinge. Kassim stopped in the yard and stared. Years ago, the first large transfer he had ever sent home had been enough to repair this entire place twice over. After that, the money had only increased. School fees for cousins, clinic bills, food, roofing, water tank, furniture. Then monthly support. Then emergency support. He had sent everything through the same family channel because it had felt honorable, efficient, safe. He had thought he was rebuilding this house from afar. Instead, the house stood before him like evidence in a trial. Mama Zawadi noticed where he was looking and gave a tired smile that hurt more than if she had cried. "The rains have been harsh," she said. He opened the door for her and stepped inside. The air smelled of damp cloth, wood, ash, and old medicine. There was almost no furniture left. One narrow table, 2 mismatched stools, a woven mat rolled in the corner, a cooking pot with a dented rim. A small shelf holding a chipped cup, a jar of salt, and 3 tablets in a folded piece of paper. Near the far wall sat a basin beneath a leak stain that had dried into the ceiling like a wound. Kassim turned slowly. No refrigerator, no new bed, no generator, no signs of the life he had paid for in his mind 100 times. Even the framed photograph of his late father was missing from the wall. In its place remained only a pale square where dust had not settled. "Mama," he said softly, because his full voice would have cracked. "Where is everything?" She lowered herself onto the stool with visible effort. "What do you mean, the repairs?" "The things I sent, the money." She busied herself adjusting her wrapper. "Life is expensive." His stare hardened. "Not this expensive." She looked away. Kassim moved to the shelf and lifted the folded paper. The medicine was expired. One strip had already yellowed at the edges. "When did you last see a doctor? I am old. Old people always have something aching. That is not what I asked." A silence opened. Outside, a goat bleated somewhere beyond the fence. The wind moved through the mango tree with a dry whisper. Kassim had never known silence could feel so evasive. Then he spotted the cooking area. He crossed to it. The charcoal tin was nearly empty. In the sack near the wall there was barely enough maize flour for 2 meals, a cup of beans, half an onion, no oil, no fish, no meat, not even tea leaves. He stood there for several seconds, staring at the poverty arranged in ordinary domestic shapes. This was not temporary hardship. This was ongoing deprivation. This was a life squeezed carefully into survival. Behind him, Mama Zawadi said too quickly, "I was not expecting you." He turned. "Were you expecting food?" She pressed her lips together. That was answer enough. Kassim inhaled once sharply and forced himself not to explode. Anger would get him noise. He needed truth. He crouched in front of her so their eyes met. "I have sent money every month," he said. "Sometimes more than once. School fees, medical support, house repairs, festival money, emergency money. I sent enough that you should never have had to beg anyone for mercy in a market." Her eyes glistened. "Don't speak so loudly. Then tell me quietly." She flinched, and that, more than anything, made him lower his voice. "Who has been taking it?" A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily. No one took anything. He let out one hollow laugh. "Mama, I have eyes." She leaned forward and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me carefully, Kassim. You must not come back asking questions like a man with power. Not here. Not yet." The words struck him. Not yet. So there was something to uncover, something specific, something dangerous. Why, he asked. But Mama Zawadi was already withdrawing again, retreating behind that thin wall of caution he had begun to see everywhere around her. "It is complicated." "No," he said. "Complicated is when accounts don't match. Complicated is when crops fail. This is not complicated. This is theft." Her face changed then. Not guilt, not surprise. Fear. Real fear. And in a whisper so faint he almost missed it, she said, "Some truths cost more than money." Kassim held her gaze. In that moment the market, the house, the expired medicine, the empty food sack, the broken roof, the terror in her voice, all of it aligned into one unbearable fact. His mother had not simply become poor, she had been trapped. And whoever had done this was close enough to know exactly how to keep her silent. Kassim did not sleep that night. He lay on the woven mat near the door because the single bed in the house belonged to his mother now, whether she admitted weakness or not. Through the darkness he listened to every small sound the house made, the creak of tired timber, the hiss of wind through a gap in the roof, the soft, uneven breathing from the next room. Once, just before dawn, he heard Mama Zawadi stifle a groan. He sat up at once. For a moment he almost rose and went to her, but then he heard the rustle of cloth, the careful shifting of a body, trying not to disturb anyone, and then silence again. Even in pain, she was still trying not to be a burden. That crushed him more than if she had cried out. By sunrise, Kassim had made one decision. He would begin with Jelani. If lies had grown thick around this house, then the man who had stood closest to the family all these years had either been blind, useless, or involved. Kassim no longer believed in blindness. The morning light revealed his mother's bruises more clearly. Purple had bloomed along her cheekbone. Her lower lip was swollen. Yet when she saw him washing at the basin, she pretended the day was ordinary. "I will cook porridge," she said. With what he asked. She paused only a fraction before forcing a smile. "There is enough." Kassim looked toward the near-empty sack in the corner. "I'll bring food later." Her hands tightened around the pot. "No. Don't spend carelessly." The sentence landed with such painful absurdity that he almost laughed. A man who could buy half the district if he wished was being warned not to spend carelessly in the kitchen where his mother had almost nothing. But he understood what she really meant. Don't attract attention. Don't move too fast. Don't let them know who you are. He stepped closer. "Where does Jelani live now?" Her face changed at once. Too quickly. Too sharply. He is busy, she said. You can see him another day. So I should wait? Yes. Why? She set the pot down with a little more force than necessary. Because people here talk. Because this is not the city. Because you do not understand what has happened while you were away. The truth in that last sentence stung. No, Kassim said quietly. I clearly don't. She turned from him. Then be wise. Start slowly. But slowness had already cost too much. An hour later, after making sure she had eaten what little porridge she insisted on sharing with him, Kassim left the house and followed the narrow road toward the newer side of Mtoni. He remembered when that area had been mostly scrub and unfinished walls. Now several concrete homes stood there, painted in bright colors with water tanks raised on metal frames and compound gates strong enough to keep out both thieves and shame. Jelani's house was the third one. Kassim stopped outside the gate and looked at it in silence. The compound wall was freshly plastered. The roof shone newer than any roof in the old quarter. A motorbike stood beneath a lean-to shelter. In the yard, 2 plastic chairs sat beside a table with a glass top. Bougainvillea climbed one corner of the wall in a neat spill of color. Even the windows had iron bars shaped decoratively instead of merely defensively. This was not wealth, but it was comfort. Solid comfort, visible comfort, respectable comfort. And it had been built while Mama Zawadi's house collapsed, one season at a time. A boy of about 8 ran across the yard chasing a punctured football. He stopped when he saw Kassim at the gate. They stared at each other. The child had large, watchful eyes and a narrow face. He was thin, but not neglected. He wore sandals that still had life in them, and a school uniform shirt, though no school bag was in sight. You are looking for someone? The boy asked. His voice was cautious, polite. Kassim felt something shift in his chest. The child was innocent, whatever this place was hiding. I'm looking for Jelani. The boy nodded toward the house. He is inside. Before Kassim could answer, the door opened. Jelani stepped out with the easy authority of a man who believed his ground beneath him was secure. He was broader than Kassim remembered, dressed in pressed trousers and a patterned short-sleeve shirt that had not come from any market bargain pile. A gold-tone watch glinted on his wrist. His beard was trimmed carefully. His sandals were leather. For 1 second, his expression emptied. Then recognition struck, and emotion flooded in so perfectly that Kassim would have admired the performance if he had not already come armed with suspicion. Kassim Jelani breathed. He crossed the yard in long strides and threw his arms around him. My brother! My brother. Kassim let the embrace happen. He did not return it. Jelani pulled back and gripped both his shoulders, eyes shining. When did you arrive? Why did no one tell me, we thought? He stopped, dramatically shaking his head. We thought maybe you had forgotten us. Forgotten? Kassim almost heard the word, as accusation, as preparation, as the first brick in a wall being rebuilt. I came yesterday, Kassim said. Jelani's eyes flicked over his faded shirt and worn sandals. Surprise flashed there, quickly masked. Like this. Like what? Jelani laughed softly. Like a man who came from the bus station with dust in his pockets. I wanted to come quietly. Jelani's smile held a strange edge. Quietly. Behind him, the child still hovered in the yard, pretending not to listen. Jelani noticed Kassim's glance. This is Jabari, he said. Come greet your uncle. The boy stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. Good morning, uncle. Kassim nodded. Good morning. There was something careful about the child, something too practiced. Children in safe homes were curious. This one measured adults before trusting the air around them. Jelani clapped a hand on the boy's shoulder. Go inside. When Jabari disappeared through the doorway, Jelani turned back. Come. Sit, you must tell me everything. They sat in the yard beneath the shade. A young woman Kassim did not know brought tea, then vanished as quickly as she came. The cups were clean porcelain edged with blue. Kassim noticed things now, the way men noticed ledgers details entered themselves into his mind, whether invited or not. Jelani leaned back with a sigh, meant to sound burdened. It has been hard here. I saw. Yes. Jelani lowered his eyes. About yesterday. I heard there was trouble in the market. I went as soon as someone told me, but by then Mama had already gone. Kassim said nothing. Jelani mistook silence for invitation. Or perhaps he simply feared it and rushed to fill it. You must understand, he said, voice softening. She has become stubborn. She refuses advice. She borrows without telling anyone, then insists she can manage alone. I have helped many times, but what can one man do when an elder refuses sense? Kassim lifted his cup but did not drink. She borrows for what Jelani spread his hands. Medicine, food, pride. Small emergencies become large ones in old age. You know how it is, no, Kassim thought. I don't, because I sent enough money that none of those emergencies should have existed. Aloud he asked. And the house, Jelani sighed again. I wanted to repair it, many times. She refused, said the old place keeps memories alive, said she would rather live with leaks than move. A smooth answer. Too smooth. Kassim let a beat pass. What about the money I sent? There it was, the first true test. Jelani's face shifted almost imperceptibly before settling into wounded surprise. The money, yes. I used it as instructed. For whom? For the family. Which family? Now Jelani leaned forward as if trying to pull Kassim back into the moral geometry he had prepared for him. Brother, do not speak like a stranger. We are one blood. There were school fees for cousins, burial costs when Auntie Rahema died, fertilizer when the rains failed, medicine, community obligations. Mama never liked details, so I carried them. You carried them well, Kassim said. Jelani blinked. The edge in the sentence was slight but unmistakable. He smiled anyway. I did what I could. Kassim looked around the compound. Better than most, it seems. For the first time, a shadow of irritation crossed Jelani's face. This house, he said lightly. Alone. A small one. And my own efforts, of course. I have worked, traded, taken risks. Not everyone who survives is a thief. The word dropped between them too early, too defensive. Kassim filed it away. I didn't accuse you, he said. No, Jelani replied, still smiling. But your eyes did. The breeze moved through the bougainvillea. Somewhere beyond the wall, a woman laughed. A radio played faintly in the distance. The morning felt deceptively normal, which only sharpened the strangeness between the brothers. Kassim set his untouched cup down. Then answer with your mouth instead. Did my mother receive everything I sent for her? Jelani held his gaze. The performance softened. The brotherly warmth thinned. What remained beneath it was colder, more calculating. She received what was possible, he said. That answer was not only false, it was prepared. Kassim stood. Jelani rose too. Don't do this, he said quickly. Not after one morning, not after 6 years away. Things are more complicated than they look. The same word. Complicated. It had already begun to sound like a curtain people used when they did not want light touching what was behind it. Kassim nodded once, as though conceding. Then help me understand. Relief flashed across Jelani's features, but only because he mistook restraint for surrender. I will, he said. Slowly. You must trust me. Trust. There it was, the most expensive word in Matoni. As Kassim stepped back toward the gate, he turned once more and looked at his half-brother standing in the clean yard, wearing a careful smile framed by a house his life should not have afforded. And for the first time since returning home, Kassim felt certainty take shape. Jelani was lying. Not clumsily, not desperately, professionally. Like a man who had been living inside a false story for so long that he no longer feared the truth, only the one person capable of proving it. Kassim spent the rest of that day doing what powerful men rarely had the patience to do. He listened, not as a billionaire, not as a returning son, not even as a wounded man hungry for someone to blame. He listened as a stranger in worn sandals who bought roasted cassava with small notes, stood in the shade without drawing attention, and let other people decide he was too ordinary to fear. Metoni Market changed character after noon. The early violence of trade softened into gossip, bargaining, heat, and slow suspicion. Women rearranged bruised tomatoes into neat red pyramids. Fish sellers fanned away flies. Tailors leaned in their doorways with tape measures around their necks. Motorbikes came and went in bursts of dust. Somewhere near the center lane, a radio sang about heartbreak and rain. Kassim moved through it quietly. Twice he heard his mother's name spoken before anyone realized he was listening. The first time, two women at a cassava stall clicked their tongues and spoke in the weary tone of people who had decided suffering was its own explanation. Old Zawadi should have yielded the house long ago, one said. The other shrugged. Maybe. But debt does not slap itself. They laughed. Kassim kept walking. The second time an old man buying kerosene muttered, "That woman has enemies, and not all enemies stand in public." The shopkeeper told him to lower his voice. The old man did, but not before Kassim had heard enough to know something important. People in Metoni did not merely believe a story about Mama Zawadi. They feared the edges of it. That fear led him finally to the far corner of the market, where grain sellers sat beneath patched tarps and spoke with the slow authority of people who saw everything because no one bothered hiding from them. There he found Mama Halima. She was older than he remembered, though age had not weakened the steadiness in her eyes. Her back was bent, but not defeated. She sat behind sacks of millet maize and beans wrapped in a faded indigo cloth, a scarf tied firmly over silver hair. Her hands were dark-veined and powerful-looking, the hands of a woman who had lifted more weight in life than most men admitted existed. Kassim paused a few steps away. She looked up once briefly, then back to the scale she was balancing for a customer. There was no sign of recognition. Not yet. When the customer left, Kassim stepped closer. "Good afternoon, Mama." "Afternoon," she replied without warmth. "Are you buying or staring?" "Both, perhaps." That earned him half a glance. He pointed to a small sack of maize flour. "And maybe asking, questions cost more than flour." "I can pay." She let that hang in the air, then named a fair price for the flour and an unfair price for conversation. Kassim paid both. Only after the coins disappeared into a cloth purse did she look at him properly. And then the smallest shift touched her face. Not shock. Recognition. "Kassim," she said so softly that the radio almost swallowed it. He nodded once. Mama Halima's eyes moved left, then right, scanning the lane before settling on him again. "You came back dressed like trouble. I came back too late." Her gaze softened for exactly one heartbeat. Then it hardened again. Too late is still later than never. "Sit." He took the low stool beside her stall, setting the sack of flour by his feet, to complete the performance of an ordinary errand. For a while neither spoke. She served two customers, argued over measurements, insulted a boy who tried to touch mangoes without buying them, and only when the lane quieted again did she say, "Your mother did not want this." "What exactly did she not want you asking?" "That means she knows." Mama Halima snorted. "Of course she knows. She has known for years." Kassim's chest tightened, though outwardly he did not move. "Then tell me what everyone else is too frightened to say plainly." She began scooping beans into a tin bowl, as if truth was easier to release while the hands were busy. Each time something came from you, it passed through other hands first. He stared at her. What do you mean, each time? I mean, each time. Money, parcels, medicine, once even roofing sheets. Your mother would hear that something had arrived only after half of it had already vanished. His voice lowered. Who touched it? Mama Halima gave him a look of irritation. Don't insult me by pretending you haven't guessed. Jelani. She did not nod. She did not need to. Instead, she said, He never worked hard enough for the life he built. Kassim glanced toward the far road where newer houses stood beyond the market. No, she echoed, and he was not alone. The market seemed to grow louder around them, though Kassim knew it was only his own blood moving harder in his ears. Tell me everything. Mama Halima clicked her tongue. Everything is a large pot. You do not pour it all at once unless you want it to spill. I'm not here for proverbs, and I am not here for city impatience. She leaned closer. You left. We remained. Learn that difference before you start demanding speed from people who had to survive by silence. The rebuke hit cleanly because it was deserved. Kassim lowered his eyes for a second. Then start where survival begins. That seemed to satisfy her. She folded a cloth over one grain sack and spoke without looking at him. The first year after you left, people respected your mother. They said you were a good son. They said your success would lift the family. Then the money started coming, and Jelani became the gatekeeper. I trusted him. Yes, that was his harvest. Kassim said nothing. Mama Halima continued. At first it was small thefts. A missing envelope, half of a transfer, a bag of rice that became 2 cups. Enough to create confusion, not accusations. If your mother complained, she was told there had been delays. Fees, transport costs, village obligations, emergencies. Why didn't she contact me directly? She tried. The words landed like a blade. Kassim turned fully toward her. How Mama Halima finally met his eyes. Letters. His mouth went dry. She wrote more than once, Mama Halima said. Many times. I saw some with my own eyes before they disappeared. She would sit at night and ask school children or churchwomen to help her spell the hard English words. She wrote carefully. Then somehow the letters never reached the post. Or they were returned to the wrong hands. Wrong hands. Jelani again. Returned to whom? She held his gaze to the people making sure your mother remained dependent, ashamed, and unbelievable. Kassim looked away toward the market lane. A group of boys ran past, laughing barefoot, reckless, alive. For one disorienting second, he hated the sound of joy. What people, he asked. Mama Halima lowered her voice further. Jelani, Bwana Kito, and Omari. At the last name, Kassim frowned. Omari, the local clerk. The same. Smiles in daylight. Stamps papers like a god. Drinks at night with men who profit from signatures. Kassim felt something cold settle inside him. You're certain I am old, not blind? She pointed with her chin toward a shuttered shop across the lane. 2 years ago after dusk, I came back for the cash box I had hidden under my table. I heard voices behind that shop. Jelani was there. Bwana Kito too. And Omari. They were arguing over amounts. Amounts of what? Your money, I assume. Land. Debt papers. Maybe both. She shrugged, but there was no uncertainty in it. Men like that never meet in darkness for charity. Kassim leaned forward. Did they see you? No. But I saw enough. What exactly? Mama Halima took a slow breath. Jelani said, If the old woman talks, no one will believe her. We already taught the market what to call her. Then Bwana Kito laughed and said, Soon the house will solve itself. Omari told them to stop drinking and finish the signatures while there was still light from the doorway. The market around Kassim tilted. Not literally, morally. The cruelty of it was almost elegant. Take the son's money. Starve the mother. Spread rumors first so truth sounds like excuse. Then turn debt into weapon and shame into proof. He spoke through clenched control. What rumors? Mama Halima's face darkened. That your mother was greedy. That she borrowed secretly. That she kept some family disgrace hidden inside that house. That she could not be trusted with money. The story changed depending on who was listening, but the purpose stayed the same. To isolate her. Yes. He exhaled slowly. And it worked. For many, she said. Not for all. A woman approached to buy sorghum. Mama Halima served her with practiced indifference, discussed measurements, handed over change, then resumed as though they had been talking about weather. Your mother stopped defending herself after a while. Why? She understood something that proud people often learn too late once a crowd enjoys your humiliation. Facts begin to bore them. Kassim closed his eyes briefly. He could see it now. Every missing transfer, every intercepted letter, every public insult. Every day his mother woke up inside a story written by other people. When he opened his eyes again, Mama Halima was watching him carefully. "Do not explode yet," she said. He almost laughed at the futility of the instruction. "You think I am still at yet?" "Yes," she said, "because if you were already finished with yet, Matoni would be burning." He said nothing. She softened just slightly. "Listen to me. Anger is easy for men who can afford consequences. But your mother has been living among these people without protection. If you strike before you know where every snake is hiding, they will bite her first." The warning cut through him. He thought of Mama Zawadi saying, "Not yet." Not because she wanted silence forever, because she knew the map of danger better than he did. "Then what am I missing?" he asked. Mama Halima hesitated for the first time. That frightened him. "There is one more thing," she said at last. "What?" She looked toward the lane, toward the road that led to Chelani's side of town, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something almost like grief. "Your mother did not stay quiet only because she was afraid." Kassim frowned. Then why? Mama Halima's eyes held his with painful steadiness. Because she was protecting someone inside that house of snakes. He stared at her. Before he could press further, footsteps sounded at the edge of the stall. A shadow fell across the sacks of grain. Both of them looked up. It was one of Bwana Kito's men. He smiled too easily, glanced from Kassim to Mama Halima, and said, "Afternoon. Busy day for old friends, isn't it?" In that instant, Kassim understood two things at once. First, they were already being watched. Second, whatever truth made his mother endure all this in silence was even worse than theft. The smile on Bwana Kito's man never touched his eyes. He stood at the edge of Mama Halima's stall, with one hand resting on a sack of beans, as if he were a customer deciding between ordinary purchases. But there was nothing ordinary in the way he looked at Kassim. It was the look of a man measuring risk. Mama Halima did not rise to the bait. "Busy enough," she said dryly. "If you came to buy grain, buy it. If you came to stare, stand somewhere less useful." The man chuckled, but his gaze stayed on Kassim. "And who is this? A customer?" Mama Halima said. "A customer asking many questions." Kassim turned toward him slowly. "Does the market now require permission for conversation?" The man's smile sharpened. "Only when conversation wanders into trouble." There it was again, that invisible fence built around his mother's suffering. Not law, not justice, just intimidation dressed like local custom. Kassim forced his face into mild confusion. "I only asked about prices." "Then ask about prices," the man replied. For 1 second, the air between them thinned into something dangerous. Kassim could feel the temptation rising in his hands, that old, clean urge to remove pretense, grab the man by the throat, and discover how quickly fear made him honest. But Mama Halima shifted a scoop deliberately, letting grain spill with a dry, rushing sound. The message was clear. Not here. Not yet. Kassim picked up the sack of flour at his feet. Then I've got my answer. He left without hurrying. Only when he turned into a narrower lane lined with broken crates and stacked baskets did he allow his jaw to tighten. He did not look back immediately. Men who had survived enemies in boardrooms and back rooms alike learned that anger announced itself most loudly in the spine. At the lane's end, he paused beside a wall patched with faded posters. Then he looked. Bwana Kito's man had not followed. Not openly, at least. Kassim stood very still and listened to the sounds of the market, breathing beyond the corner, bargaining a child crying, the clatter of metal bowls, someone shouting over motorcycle noise. Everything sounded normal, which meant nothing was. A few steps later, he felt it again. Not footsteps. Awareness. He was being noticed now. Marked. Weighed. His arrival in Matoni had already entered the system of men who fed on silence. By the time he reached the old house, the afternoon heat had started folding into evening. The yard lay in long orange shadow. A basin stood by the doorway where his mother had washed clothes and left them draped over a rope that sagged from one post to another. The garments were thin from years of use. Mama Zawadi was seated on a low stool peeling cassava with a knife so dull it tore more than cut. She looked up the moment he entered the yard. What happened? The question came too quickly, too instinctively. He stopped. Why do you ask that first? Her hands resumed moving. Because your face changed. Kassim set down the flour and the few other supplies he had bought from different stalls to avoid attention. Salt tea leaves, dried fish tomatoes, cooking oil. Even this small collection of food transformed the room with a kind of quiet accusation. His mother noticed it too. You bought too much. No, he said. I bought what should have been here already. She lowered her eyes. He watched her for a long moment. The instinct to confront her immediately burned through him. Mama Halima's words still rang inside his skull. Your mother did not stay quiet only because she was afraid, because she was protecting someone. He stepped closer. Mama, who was that man in the market? She kept peeling. Which man, the one who was beating you? A collector. For whose debt? She did not answer. Kassim crouched in front of her, one hand closing gently but firmly around the knife. She let go of it. Look at me. Reluctantly, she did. I spoke to Mama Halima. A flicker, small but unmistakable. His mother's face did not crumble or harden. It did something worse. It braced. What did she tell you, she asked, that you wrote letters to me? Silence. That money and parcels were intercepted. More silence. That Jelani was not alone. Her breathing changed. Kassim leaned in, voice low. How many letters, Mama? At first he thought she would deny it. Instead she looked past him toward the dark corner of the room where the old cooking stones sat blackened with years of smoke. Too many, she said. The words were so faint they barely existed. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Too many. Not one desperate attempt. Not one message lost by chance. A chain of reaching hands. A chain of unanswered years. When he asked, whenever it became unbearable, and you never found another way to contact me, I tried. How? She swallowed. I asked travelers. Church people. A teacher once. Then I stopped asking strangers because strangers talk. Kassim sat back on his heels, looking at her as if the woman before him had become both more familiar and more unreachable at the same time. Why didn't you tell me when I called? Her laugh came out broken. Tell you what? That the line was never private, that every time someone said, "Your son called," I had to answer with 3 people listening. That if I sounded worried, the conversation ended before I finished a sentence. Kassim stared. His mother had not merely been robbed. She had been managed, contained, like a prisoner allowed just enough movement to create the illusion of freedom. He rose and began pacing the room once, twice. Then his eyes caught on something beneath the old table. A metal edge, dull with rust, half hidden under a folded sack. He stopped. "Mama." She followed his gaze and at once said too sharply, "Leave that." The warning came so fast that it confirmed everything. Kassim bent and dragged out a small tin box, the kind once used for storing tea or sewing thread. Rust had eaten through the floral pattern on the lid. A strip of faded cloth had been tied around it, as if to keep the metal from springing open. His mother stood so suddenly the stool scraped the floor. "Kassim." "No." He looked at her. For a second, neither moved. Then he untied the cloth. Inside lay years. Letters folded and refolded until the paper had gone soft at the creases. A few envelopes with his own handwriting on them, torn at the corner, their seals broken. A bank transfer slip. A clinic receipt. 2 photographs. And beneath them all, a legal document browned at the edges. Kassim's hands did not tremble at first. They went unnaturally steady the way they had in crisis negotiations, and hostile takeovers the way they always did when rage became too large to spill. He lifted the first letter. The paper smelled faintly of dust smoke and old rain. The English was uneven. Some words were misspelled. Others had clearly been written by a different hand, perhaps the teacher his mother mentioned. But the voice inside it was hers. "My son Kassim, I do not want to trouble your heart, but I think something is wrong with the money you sent. Jelani says the amount was small, but the man from town said it was enough for roofing and medicine. Maybe I am confused. Maybe I am becoming old in the head. Forgive me if I am mistaken." He lowered the letter, then opened another. "My son, today I am writing because the roof still leaks, and I have sold 2 bowls and your father's radio. I am ashamed to ask again. If you have no money, do not worry. I only wanted you to know I tried not to burden anyone." Then another. "My son, please do not be angry when you hear stories. They are saying things in the market. I did not do what they say. I swear before God I did not. If this letter reaches you, come only when you are safe." His vision blurred, not with tears yet, with disbelief so complete it felt physical. His mother had been shrinking her pain even in private letters, softening it, apologizing for it, protecting him from the truth, while begging truth to somehow survive the road between them. He turned to the opened envelopes bearing his own handwriting. One had once contained cash. The inside was empty. Another held a note he had written years ago, during one of the loneliest months of his life in Nairobi, when success had first begun feeling like exile. "Mama, buy what you need first. Repair the roof before rains. Don't argue with anyone about cost. There is more coming next month." He had meant every word, and somewhere between his hand and hers, every word had been turned into mockery. His chest caved inward. He reached for the transfer slip. The amount printed there was enough to replace the entire roof, furnish the house cover medicine for a year, and still leave money for comfort. The receiving signature below was not his mother's. Even to an untrained eye, it looked forced, slow, copied wrong. Kassim looked up. "He forged your name." Mama Zawadi did not answer. He picked up the clinic receipt, paid in full. Expensive treatment. A hospital in town. His mother had never received it. That much was obvious from the expired tablets on the shelf. He pressed his thumb and forefinger to his eyes. Then he saw the photographs. The first was old, so old that the edges had curled. It showed him at perhaps 17 standing beside Mama Zawadi in front of the original family land. He had forgotten that day. His shirt had been too large, his face too serious, his dreams still narrow enough to fit inside a single district road. The second photograph was newer and far harder to understand. It showed a parcel of bare land with a boundary marker and a man in a suit standing beside a paper sign. Sold. On the back, in faint writing, were the words, "For Kassim's future." His breath stopped. He seized the brown legal document beneath the photographs and unfolded it. It was the deed transfer, the ancestral land. Sold years ago. The seller Zawadi Binti Salim, his mother. The amount listed was pitiful compared to what the land should have brought. But that was not what broke him. What broke him was the date. It matched the year he had been arrested on false theft charges in the city. The year a lawyer had appeared suddenly. The year his bail had been paid. The year an opportunity to leave study and disappear into a different life had opened like a door he had once called luck. It had not been luck. It had been his mother. She had sold the ground beneath her own feet to buy him a future and never told him. Kassim sat down hard on the stool as if his legs had lost all instruction. When the tears came, they came without dignity. Not loud, not theatrical, just a sudden brutal overflow from a place in him that had been armored too long. Across from him, Mama Zawadi pressed a hand over her mouth. "Kassim." "You sold the land," he whispered. She said nothing. "You sold everything. I sold what I could. To save me." Her own eyes filled then. "You were my son." As if that explained it. As if mothers did not need gratitude, only survival. As if the destruction of a woman's whole security could be reduced to that one unbearable fact: you were my son. Kassim bowed his head over the papers and wept. Not because he was weak, because truth had finally become heavier than pride. And because the worst wound was no longer the theft. It was the life he had lived all these years believing he had climbed alone. Kassim cried only once in front of his mother. When the tears stopped, they stopped completely. What remained was not calm. It only looked like calm from the outside. Inside him something had changed shape. The son who had returned in dusty sandals to understand a wound had now seen the knife, the hand that held it, and the years of blood hidden under polite lies. Mama Zawadi knelt beside him slowly, her joints stiff, her face still bruised from the market. She touched the back of his hand with trembling fingers. "I did not keep it from you to hurt you," she said. Kassim stared at the old land deed in his lap. The ink had faded, but not enough to erase what it had done to her life. "You kept it from me, so I could succeed without guilt." She said nothing, and that silence was confession. He lifted his head. "All these years I thought I was repaying you. You were helping your family. I was trying to repay a debt I didn't even understand." His voice roughened. "And while I was doing that, they were stealing from you in my name." Mama Zawadi lowered her eyes. Kassim gathered the letters carefully and put them back into the tin box, as if he were handling bones. He set the box on the table, then stood, and walked to the doorway for air. Evening had deepened. The sky above Metoni was turning from orange to purple. Somewhere beyond the fence, a child laughed. Pots clanged. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The village was entering that hour when hunger and routine disguised each other. Behind him, his mother spoke again. "There is more." He turned slowly. Not because the word surprised him. By then, he almost expected every truth in that house to have another truth beneath it. But there was something in her tone that made him go still. Not fear alone. Shame. And not the shame of guilt. The shame of having suffered in silence so long that speaking now felt like betrayal. Kassim walked back inside and closed the door. "Tell me." Mama Zawadi sat on the stool, but she did not look at him immediately. Her hands twisted the edge of her wrapper until the fabric pulled tight between her fingers. Jelani was not always like this, she said at last. Kassim said nothing. As a boy, he was jealous, yes. Proud, quick to feel small, but not cruel. She looked up, eyes wet but steady. Cruelty came later. It grew when money began touching his hands. And you watched it grow. I tried to stop it. You let him keep stealing. The accusation landed hard. She absorbed it without protest. Yes. Kassim turned away, then turned back. Why? She inhaled slowly, as if the answer itself had thorns. Because he was not the only one I was protecting. Kassim felt the air thin. Mama Halima's warning returned in full. Your mother did not stay quiet only because she was afraid, because she was protecting someone inside that house of snakes. Jabari, he said. His mother's head jerked up. You know his name. I met him. For a brief second, relief and dread crossed her face at the same time. Then you saw. Saw what? That he is only a child. Kassim's impatience sharpened. Mama, stop speaking in half-truths. Tell me fully. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she seemed older than she had that morning. Jabari is not Jelani's son. Kassim frowned. Then whose? She took a breath that shuddered at the edges. Your father's. The room went silent. Kassim stood very still, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something less impossible. They did not. My father died years ago. Yes, and Jabari is 8. Yes. He stared at her. Then say the rest. Mama Zawadi pressed a palm to her chest, as though steadying a pain that had waited a long time to be named. Before your father fell sick, before the last season of his life, there was another woman. The words should have shocked him more loudly. Instead, they landed with a strange, cold heaviness. In poor homes and rich homes alike, men had always found ways to turn betrayal into burden for women. Kassim asked, Did you know then? No. Her mouth tightened. I learned later, after he was dead. The woman came to me when she was already ill. She had nowhere to go. She brought a little boy barely old enough to speak. Jabari? Mama Zawadi nodded. She was afraid, she continued. Afraid of her own family. Afraid of being blamed. Afraid the child would be called a curse. She told me the truth because she had no strength left for lies. She said your father had promised to help her, then died before he could do anything honorable. Kassim swallowed hard. And you took them in? For a while? Quietly. Then the woman died too. He looked away toward the darkening window. His father's photograph was gone from the wall, but suddenly the whole house felt crowded with him, with his mistakes, his secrets, the debts he had left women to carry in flesh and silence. Why didn't you tell me? Kassim asked. Because you were already gone. Because I did not want your future poisoned by his sin. Because the child had done nothing wrong. He turned back sharply. And Jelani knew. That answer opened another door. How? He saw her once before she died. Later he found the old baptism paper with your father's name written where no name should have been. After that, Mama Zawadi's voice thinned. After that he understood he had power. Kassim's jaw clenched. So he blackmailed you. At first, no. At first he only threatened to expose the story if I did not give him access to what came from you. He said the village would spit on Jabari. He said the church would whisper. He said people would call your father filthy in death and call me a fool in life. And that mattered more than the theft. No, she said, suddenly fierce. The child mattered. The force in her voice stopped him. For the first time since this conversation began, Mama Zawadi's shame gave way to something stronger. moral clarity sharpened by years of pain. "You think I stayed silent for Jelani?" she asked. "You think I let that boy turn my life into ash because I feared gossip about myself?" Tears trembled in her eyes, but her voice did not break. "I stayed silent because once the market smells scandal, it feeds on the weakest first. Not the men who caused it, not the dead man who betrayed me. The child. Always the child." Kassim said nothing. She rose from the stool slowly but with dignity and faced him fully. Jabari did not ask to be born. He did not ask for a father who died before claiming him. He did not ask for a mother who could not stay alive. He did not ask to land in this house under the mercy of people already wounded. Her throat tightened, and he did not ask for Jelani. Kassim thought of the boy in the yard, watchful, polite, measuring danger, without understanding the architecture of it. "Mama Halima said you were protecting someone inside that house," he said. "Yes. Jelani used Jabari as a shield. He used him as a rope around my neck." Kassim paced once, both hands on his hips, fighting the urge to strike something solid enough to answer back. At the highest levels of business betrayal usually came hidden in contracts, timing, market pressure. Here it had come in a more intimate form, family as weapon, innocence as leverage, shame as currency. "He forged your signature, intercepted money, spread rumors, hired men to beat you in public, and you kept quiet because he threatened the child." Mama Zawadi nodded once. "There's more, isn't there?" She hesitated. He saw it immediately. "What?" "Some of the debt papers." She looked away. "They are tied to Jabari." Kassim froze. "What does that mean?" "Omari helped prepare documents that make it appear as if household support, school costs, and medical expenses for the boy were loans taken in my name. Jelani said if I resisted, he would say I signed willingly to hide the child's parentage. He said once papers existed, truth would not matter." Kassim gave a low, disbelieving laugh that held no humor at all. "So they built a cage out of paperwork and rumor." "Yes." "And Bwana Kito." He made the fear visible. Kassim understood at once. Omari handled the papers. Jelani controlled the family story. Bwana Kito handled public intimidation. Together they formed a machine. He looked at his mother with a pain that was now almost reverent. "You carried all this alone." "No." Her expression softened. "I carried it with God. And sometimes with Halima. That was enough to survive. Not enough to win." Those words settled over the room like a verdict. Not enough to win. Kassim stepped toward her. "It will be enough now." She gripped his wrist. "Listen to me carefully." He fell silent. "If you destroy Jelani without protecting Jabari first, the village will tear the child apart with their mouths. If you expose everything carelessly, your father's sin will become the boy's identity. If you move like a rich man who can leave after the dust settles, you will save my name and ruin his future." Kassim held her gaze. She was right. Justice in its bluntest form would be easy. He could call lawyers, officials, police from the district. He could strip every lie down to naked fact before sundown tomorrow if he wished. But truth without mercy would still wound the innocent. "And if I do nothing?" He said, "They keep feeding on you." "Yes. So I need both." She nodded. Truth and protection. He looked toward the door, toward the darkness where Matoni waited with all its eyes and ears. "Then that is what they'll get." Mama Zawadi's fingers tightened around his wrist one last time. "Be careful, Kassim." He covered her hand with his. For the first time since returning, he no longer felt only like a son in pain. He felt like a man standing at the threshold of judgment. Not just for theft, not just for betrayal, but for every way a family had forced one woman to bleed quietly, so everyone else could keep pretending they were still a family at all. By dawn, Mtoni Market was already awake. Smoke rose from charcoal stoves in thin grey ribbons. Metal basins rang against wooden tables. Women in bright wrappers arranged tomatoes, okra, onions, and cassava in practiced pyramids. Men rolled sacks of grain into position. Motorbikes cut through the morning haze like restless insects. Somewhere near the butcher's row, a radio coughed out a gospel song that kept fading in and out with the weak electricity. And through it all, rumour moved faster than trade. The old woman had been beaten again. The son had returned. A stranger had interfered. Jelani was angry. Bwana Kito was waiting. By 8 o'clock, no one said these things directly, yet everyone seemed to know them. Kassim walked into the market wearing the same faded shirt and worn sandals as before. That in itself was a decision. He could have changed. He could have appeared in authority, clean and commanding, with the kind of visible confidence that made lesser men begin apologizing before evidence even touched them. But power revealed too much too soon. And today Kassim needed men to feel safe enough to lie in public. Behind him a hired cart rolled slowly through the lane, carrying sacks. A folded wooden table and one locked metal case. To anyone watching it looked like market business. Only Mama Halima, seated at her stall in the grain corner, knew better. She did not greet him. She only adjusted her scarf once, a sign that the lane was clear. Kassim positioned the wooden table near the wide central space where market disputes were sometimes handled, in front of witnesses. Not officially, not legally, but in places like Mtoni, public shame often arrived before public justice. Within minutes, people began gathering. At first, they came with the cautious distance of people pretending not to be interested. Then in twos and threes. Then in full, unapologetic curiosity. A fish seller abandoned her stall. 2 boys climbed onto an overturned crate for a better view. A tailor emerged with scissors still hanging around his neck. Women who had watched Mama Zawadi's humiliation from the safety of silence now stood shoulder to shoulder, hungry for whatever was coming next. Good, Kassim thought. Let them watch. Mama Zawadi did not come. He had asked her to remain at home for now. She had resisted until he promised that nothing would begin until he was ready to protect both Truth and Jabari together. Even then, she had looked at him the way mothers look at sons who are about to step into fire and call it duty. By mid-morning the men arrived. First came Bwana Kito, broad and thick-necked, his chin scar pale in the light. He walked with the confidence of someone used to being feared in public and hated only in private. 2 of his men followed behind him. One of them, the same one who had appeared at Mama Halima's stall the previous day wearing that oily smile. Then came Omari, the local clerk, in a pressed cream shirt, already damp at the underarms despite the early hour. He held himself with bureaucratic dignity, chin lifted, one leather folder tucked beneath his arm. The kind of man who looked weak until paper was involved. Jelani came last. He was dressed more carefully today than he had been yesterday. Dark trousers, polished sandals, a pale blue shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly. He smiled as he entered the crowd, as if this were not a trap, but a misunderstanding he intended to settle with civility and regret. That smile almost impressed Kassim. Almost. Jelani stopped several feet from the table and spread his hands. "Brother," he said warmly, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "if you wished to speak, you could have come to my house again. There is no need to turn family pain into spectacle." The line was expertly chosen. Kassim heard it for what it was, an attempt to seize moral ground before the fight even began. He answered in the same volume. "Family pain became spectacle yesterday when our mother was beaten in this market, and no one here stopped it." The words cracked through the crowd. Several faces shifted. A woman near the front lowered her eyes. An older man cleared his throat and pretended interest in a sack of onions. Bwana Kito gave a dismissive snort. "A debtor is a debtor." Kassim turned toward him. "Then today should please you. We are here to discuss debt." Omari stepped forward smoothly. "If this concerns legal matters, It should go through proper channels, not public agitation. Legal matters, Kassim said. Excellent. Stay close then. I may need help reading signatures. A murmur rippled outward. Jelani's smile tightened by less than an inch, but Kassim saw it. Still, he said, You are upset. Understandably. You came home and found hardship. I do not blame your emotions, but some matters are more complex than they appear. Complex. Again. The word had become their shared refuge, the polite cloth they threw over rot. Kassim rested both palms on the table. Then simplify them for me. Jelani sighed as though burdened by the childish stubbornness of a younger brother. Mama borrowed repeatedly over the years. For food, medicine, upkeep, school support. For whose school support Kassim cut in. Jelani paused. Household obligations. Who's our families? Kassim's voice sharpened. Name them. For the first time, Jelani's gaze flickered. Only briefly. But the crowd saw it too. He recovered quickly. Must grief now become accounting? Yes, Kassim said. When grief was created through accounting. A few people in the crowd gave small, involuntary sounds, half approval, half fear. Bwana Kito crossed his arms. This is foolish. The old woman took loans. I collected what was owed. There is nothing mysterious in that. Kassim nodded slowly. Then you won't object to evidence. He unlocked the metal case and lifted out the first bundle photocopies of bank transfer records, arranged neatly and marked by date. The crowd leaned forward as one body. Jelani's face did not change, but Omari's fingers tightened around his leather folder. Kassim held up the papers. For 6 years I sent money home, monthly support, emergency support, roofing money, medical support, festival money, school support. Some amounts large enough to change an entire household. These are bank records. Dates, amounts, receiving channels. He laid them across the table in view. The numbers alone were enough to alter the air. Even those who could not read well recognized abundance when it stared at them in ordered ink. Murmurs grew louder. That much every month. Then how Jelani lifted both hands. Brother, no one denies you sent money, but sending is not the same as understanding what life costs here. Kassim nodded once. Correct. Which is why I also brought something else. He drew out a second set of documents. Withdrawal slips, signed receipts, copies of transfer collections. Several bore Mama Zawadi's name. Several bore signatures that looked like broken imitations of it. Kassim turned to Omari. Since you raised legal concerns, perhaps you can help the market. Do these signatures appear consistent to you? Omari laughed too quickly. I am not a handwriting expert. No, Kassim said. Just a man who stamps papers after dark. The crowd reacted immediately. A sharp sound rose, surprise mixed with appetite. Omari's face drained by a shade. You should be careful with slander, he said. Should I? Kassim asked. Then he lifted another paper, the clinic receipt from Part 5, along with the expired tablets he had found at home. This payment, he said, was made for treatment in town. Full amount. Enough to cover examinations, medication, transport. Yet the woman it was paid for was found yesterday with expired pills and untreated injuries. He placed the yellowed tablets on the table like accusation made solid. Bwana Kito shifted his weight. Jelani stepped in fast, trying to reclaim the ground. Do you think suffering is a simple line from one pocket to one stomach? He demanded, turning partly to the crowd now. This is exactly what happens when someone leaves for years and returns expecting a village to behave like a bank statement. There were funerals, failed harvests, community needs, school fees, sickness, drought, emergencies. He sends money, yes. We survive as best we can with it. Some heads nodded. Kassim had expected that. Jelani was good. He knew the crowd's moral habits. In poor communities, survival often involved shared need, blurred lines, sacrifices nobody recorded. If he could make theft look like communal strain, many would excuse him out of familiarity alone. So Kassim let the silence stretch. Then he opened the tin box. And the market changed. He took out one letter folded and softened by years of handling, and read only enough to wound the lie. "My son," he said, voice steady, "I think something is wrong with the money you sent. The man from town said it was enough for roofing and medicine." He set it down and lifted another. "My son, I sold 2 bowls and your father's radio. Another. They are saying things in the market. I did not do what they say." Now there was no murmur, only stillness. Even the radio in the butcher's row seemed far away. Jelani's expression finally cracked. Not much, but enough. He had not expected the letters. Kassim saw it and pressed harder. "These letters were written by my mother over years. They never reached me." He looked directly at the crowd. "Ask yourselves why." No one answered, because now the answer was visible, not proven fully, but visible. Bwana Kito barked. "Anyone can bring papers." "True," Kassim said. He lifted the final document, the forged withdrawal slip with Mama Zawadi's false signature. Then another. Then another. A pattern. Not a mistake. Not hardship. Method. He placed them side by side in a row. The crowd could see, then said quietly, "Anyone can make a mistake once. Theft repeats." Omari took a half-step backward. Jelani moved immediately, voice hardening. "Enough! This is emotional theater. You come dressed like a beggar, stir gossip, throw papers on a table, and expect people to forget everything our mother did." Kassim's head snapped up. There it was. Too soon, too desperate, too poisonous. Jelani had reached for the oldest weapon. Turn the mother into the scandal again. "What exactly did she do?" Kassim asked softly. Jelani froze. The crowd leaned in. And in that charged, breathless second, Kassim knew the trap had closed. Because a guilty man could deny documents. But only a vicious one under pressure would reach instinctively for the same secret he had used for years to keep an old woman silent. For one suspended second, the entire market seemed to inhale and forget how to release the breath. Jelani had said too much, not enough to reveal the whole secret, but enough to prove that the secret existed and that he had been using it like a knife for years. Kassim did not move from behind the table. He did not need to. The crowd had already shifted in the oldest human way possible, away from certainty and toward suspicion. A woman near the front crossed her arms and frowned at Jelani. The tailor with the scissors around his neck took one step sideways for a better view. Even the 2 boys on the crate stopped whispering. Jelani realized what had happened a heartbeat too late. He lifted his chin and forced a laugh that landed badly. "You see," he said, looking around at the crowd. "This is what I mean. He drags family shame into daylight, then stares at me as if I am the one who opened the door." Kassim answered quietly. "You did." Bwana Kito stepped in before silence could deepen further. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked. The old woman owed. "We collected. That is all." "That is not all," Kassim said. He bent and drew one more item from the metal case, a small audio recorder, old-fashioned plain, the kind people ignored because it looked less important than a mobile phone. Several people in the crowd exchanged glances. Omari's face changed first, only slightly. But it was enough. Kassim placed the recorder on the table. "I did not come to Matoni with anger alone," he said. "I came with preparation." That was true, though not in the way the crowd assumed. The recorder held a statement he had obtained at dawn from the transport agent in town, the man who had handled several of his remittances over the years. Kassim had sent someone he trusted the night before with money instructions and one final warning: tell the truth now or tell it later, where it will cost more. The agent had chosen now. Kassim pressed play. Static crackled. Then a nervous male voice filled the market's central lane. "My name is Yusuf Mbele. I work with transfer deliveries between the district office and Matoni. I am recording this voluntarily. Over several years I delivered notices and funds sent by Kassim Salim for his mother Zawadi. In many cases I was told by Jelani Salim that he was collecting on her behalf. Once or twice I asked why the old woman herself never came. Jelani said she was sick or ashamed or unable to travel. On at least 3 occasions, Clerk Omari assisted with verification papers. I now believe some signatures were not genuine. The crowd erupted. Not loudly, not all at once, but in waves, sharp exhalations muttered disbelief questions colliding with one another. Omari lunged forward. "This proves nothing. A recording can be coerced." Kassim hit pause. "Should I play the part where he names the dates?" he asked. Omari stopped. The leather folder beneath his arm now looked less like authority and more like a shield. Jelani tried a different tactic. He stepped closer to Kassim and lowered his voice, though not enough to keep the crowd from hearing the heat in it. "Brother, stop this now. For Mama's sake." Kassim turned to him. "Do not use her as a roof over your lies." Jelani's nostrils flared. The civility was thinning. Bwana Kito spat into the dust. "This market is not a courtroom." "No," Kassim said. "It is the place where my mother was humiliated in public. So public truth will begin here." He pressed play again. Yusuf's voice returned shakier now. "And I also delivered roofing sheets once paid for in full. They were redirected. I was told to leave them at a storage shed belonging to Bwana Kito. I objected, but Omari said the matter had district approval. I was wrong to stay silent." Kassim stopped the recording. This time the crowd did not murmur. It turned. Not physically, not fully, but morally. The axis of judgment shifted. Men who had stood at ease now looked pinned inside their own skin. Women who had once muttered that Mama Zawadi should have yielded the house now stared at the ground. Then from the left side of the lane, a voice rose, clear and angry. "I saw those sheets! Mama Halima!" She had stood up behind her stall. All eyes swung toward her. "Warden." The old woman planted both palms on the grain table, as if daring anyone to silence her now. "I saw them with my own eyes," she said. "They were not taken to Zawadi's house. They disappeared before sunset. And when I asked, I was told old women who value peace should keep their mouths busy with prayer instead of questions." A few people laughed nervously. No one from Bwana Kito's side laughed at all. Then another voice joined. The old man from the kerosene shop. "And I saw Omari behind Musa's closed shop with Jelani and Kito. After dark, he shouted. 2 years ago. I kept quiet because I am a coward. But I saw." The release had begun. That was the thing about fear in public. Once one person broke it, others discovered their own silence had become heavier than truth. A woman selling dried fish stepped forward next. There were rumors, she said, trembling. We all heard them. About Zawadi. But no one ever saw proof. Only words. Always words. And who spread those words, Kassim asked. Nobody answered directly. They did not have to. Every eye had already turned back toward Jelani. His face was no longer composed. Sweat gleamed at his temples. His hands opened and closed once at his sides, as if he could still choose between pleading and attacking. He chose attack. "You idiots!" he snapped, spinning toward the crowd. "You think any of you are clean? You think survival here happens without compromise? Money came into this village, yes. It passed through hands, yes. Everyone benefited. Everyone. School fees were paid. Funerals were handled. Debts were balanced. And now you stand there pretending shock because the old woman suffered. Everyone here has suffered." The outburst hit the market like a slap, because hidden inside it was the confession he had spent all morning avoiding. Money came, it passed through hands, and he had controlled the passage. Omari hissed Jelani. But it was too late. Kassim stepped forward. Say it properly. Jelani turned back, eyes blazing. Fine. You want proper fine. He jabbed a finger toward Kassim. You left. I stayed. You sent money from towers and thought that made you a savior. Do you know what it is to remain in the dust while everyone praises the absent son? Do you know what it is to carry the family name in the village while your mother speaks your brother's name like prayer? His voice shook now, raw with long-fed bitterness. I took what I deserved. The words landed harder than a full denial ever could have. Gasps broke openly across the crowd. Mama Halima closed her eyes for 1 second, not in surprise, but in exhausted recognition. Kassim spoke with terrible calm. You stole from your own mother, Jelani barked back. She was not your only mothered child in this story. There it was again, that dark pull toward the buried scandal. Kassim saw several faces sharpen with curiosity, the cruel kind that crowds reserved for secrets involving blood and shame. He could not allow that door to open carelessly, not with Jabari standing somewhere behind it. So he changed direction. And Bwana Kito Kassim asked, What did he deserve? Jelani's mouth tightened shut. Kassim turned to the scarred creditor. Say it for him. Bwana Kito folded his arms. I collect. Men hire me to collect. So you were hired. Silence. By whom? Silence again. Kassim lifted the forged documents and shook them once in the air. By the man who needed visible fear. Omari made paper. Jelani made family shame. You made bruises. Bwana Kito's jaw shifted. Then he made the mistake prideful men often made under pressure. He laughed. Bruises, he said. If I wanted that old woman broken, she would not have stood up again. The market recoiled. Even his own men looked at him, because now the mask had slipped from enforcement into cruelty. Collection implied business. That sentence implied appetite. Omari took 2 steps back. He was abandoning the alliance in real time. You fools, he muttered. You've ruined everything. Kassim caught it immediately. Everything. Omari looked up and realized he had spoken aloud. The clerk swallowed. His shoulders sagged by a fraction. He was the weakest link now, the kind of man who could survive corruption only while it remained elegant. Public collapse terrified him more than prison did. I only processed what I was given, he said quickly. I never laid a hand on anyone. I only stamped documents. The household loan papers were already prepared when they came to me. I assumed the household loan papers, Kassim repeated. Omari shut his mouth. The crowd went silent again, not because they understood all of it, because they understood enough. There were papers, many papers, not just one debt, a construction of debt. Kassim stared at him. You forged more than collection slips. Omari shook his head too fast. No, I mean, I did not write them all. Who did? Omari looked at Jelani. That single glance was as good as a sworn affidavit. Jelani saw the betrayal and lunged not at Kassim, but at Omari. You rat! Bwana Kito grabbed his arm too late. The movement overturned one edge of the table. Documents slid. The recorder clattered to the ground. The crowd scattered back with sharp cries. One of Kito's men stepped in, then stepped out again when he saw Kassim straighten. Because something in Kassim had changed. He no longer looked like a poor man with papers. He looked like consequence-wearing dust. When he spoke next, his voice cut through the market with such authority that even the wind seemed to pause around it. This ends now. Jelani froze. Bwana Kito's grip loosened. Omari stood panting, cornered by his own paperwork and fear. Kassim reached into his pocket and took out his phone, not the cheap one he had carried openly, but the other one, the one he had kept hidden. He unlocked it, pressed one number, and lifted it where they could all see. Then he said the sentence that turned the market from scandal into collapse. I gave all of you the chance to stop at lies. Now you will answer to names bigger than this village." And before anyone could react, the first black SUV rolled into the market road. The first black SUV rolled into Metoni Market like a rumor made metal. Then came the second. Then a third behind it. Dust rose in heavy clouds around the tires, drifting across vegetable stalls, shoe stands, fish tables, and open mouths. The engines cut almost at once, but the silence they left behind felt louder than noise. Every eye in the market followed the vehicles, as if looking away might somehow undo what had just happened. Kassim lowered the phone slowly. He did not smile. He did not need to. One driver stepped out first. Then two men in dark suits. Then a woman carrying a leather folder and a tablet. Behind them came a district police officer in uniform, another in plain clothes, and finally a tall, grey-haired attorney whose face none of the villagers recognized, but whose manner announced authority before he spoke a word. The market broke into whispers. Who are they, police lawyers? Who is this man? But the better question was already hanging there, sharper and more dangerous. Who is Kassim, really? Jelani took a half-step backward. Bwana Kito's thick confidence evaporated with astonishing speed. Men like him knew exactly how much power they possessed in dusty markets among frightened vendors. They also knew the instant that power ended. The arrival of official cars, tailored suits, and district officers marked the border between local terror and consequences too large to intimidate with a slap. Omari looked ready to faint. Kassim said nothing until the grey-haired attorney reached him. Then, in a voice the entire market could hear, the man said, "Mr. Salim." The title moved through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Not Kassim, not brother, not son. Mr. Salim. Respectful, formal, public. The villagers stared. Mama Halima did not. She merely lowered herself onto her stool again, as though the world had finally decided to behave according to truths she had known all along. The attorney placed the leather folder on the table beside the scattered documents and spoke clearly. "We have reviewed the transfer records collection receipts, property irregularities, medical disbursement discrepancies, and preliminary witness statements provided this morning. District authorities are prepared to open formal charges." Gasps rippled through the market. Kassim could almost feel the moment his identity settled inside the crowd. Not fully, not rationally, but enough. The poor man in the faded shirt was no poor man. The stranger who had stepped between a creditor and an old woman was not a stranger at all. He was someone who could summon law money and distance into one place with a single phone call. Bwana Kito tried first. Men like him always did. He lifted both hands and forced a sneer that came too late to sound convincing. "So this is what it is. A big man performance. You leave get rich somewhere else, then come home with officers and papers to frighten villagers." The district officer in uniform turned toward him. "Be careful how you speak." Kassim met Bwana Kito's stare. "You were brave yesterday when you were striking an old woman." A low, ashamed murmur moved through the crowd. The officer in plain clothes stepped forward. "Bwana Kito, Omari Njoro, and Jelani Salim do not leave this area." That sentence changed everything. It made the matter real. Not rumor, not market theater, not family quarrel. Real. Jelani's face hardened. "This is madness," he snapped. "You cannot arrest people because a rich man comes home with emotion and paperwork." The grey-haired attorney opened the folder. Forgery of collection signatures, fraudulent redirection of remittances, coercive debt construction, property intimidation, assault, conspiracy involving public documentation. "We have enough for detention and formal investigation." "Investigation?" Omari repeated quickly, seizing the smallest word like a drowning man grabbing floating debris. "You hear that, investigation? Nothing is proven." Kassim turned to him. "Not everything has to be proven in 1 hour, Omari. Only enough to stop you from hurting her again. The clerk swallowed hard. That was the point none of them had understood until too late. Kassim had not come merely to win. He had come to end their access, to cut the machinery, to make sure Mama Zawadi would no longer wake tomorrow under the shadow of men who had learned to feed on her silence. One of the officers began collecting the documents from the table with careful hands. Another asked Mama Halima for her full name and statement. The old man from the kerosene shop came forward too, suddenly eager now that courage had backup. Even the woman selling dried fish stepped closer and admitted what she had heard over the years. Truth was spreading now, not beautifully, not nobly, but usefully. Kassim watched Jelani's eyes as each new witness stepped forward. There was no remorse there, not yet, only panic and calculation moving rapidly as he searched for one final path out. And then, as Kassim had feared, Jelani found the most dangerous one. He pointed across the market and shouted, "Fine! Ask our mother why she was so desperate to hide her house from scrutiny. Ask her what child she kept there. Ask her whose blood enough." Kassim's voice hit the market like a slammed iron gate. Every head turned. For 1 second, even the officers paused. Kassim stepped forward until he stood directly in front of Jelani, close enough that only a breath separated them. "You will answer for your theft," he said. "You will answer for forged papers. You will answer for using fear against a woman who raised you. But you will not use a child as smoke now that the fire has reached your own feet." Jelani's nostrils flared. "So it's true." Kassim did not blink. "What's true is that you hid behind innocence because you had none." That was all the market needed. The secret itself remained unnamed, protected, contained. And because Kassim refused to feed the crowd's appetite for scandal, the shape of moral judgment shifted again. What mattered now was not some whispered old sin tied to the dead. What mattered was what Jelani had done in the living present, what he had stolen, forged, manipulated, and orchestrated. Mama Zawadi arrived then. No one had seen her approach. One moment the crowd was fixed on Kassim and Jelani. The next people were parting quietly as she moved through them, in a clean but simple wrapper. Her bruised face uncovered her back straighter than Kassim had seen it in years. A hush fell over the market. Shame did that sometimes. It stepped aside when dignity entered too late. Kassim turned at once. "Mama." But she lifted a hand, gently silencing him. She walked to the front of the gathering and stood where everyone could see her. The bruises on her cheekbone were still dark. The cut on her lip had dried. Nothing about her looked grand or theatrical. She looked exactly what she had always been, an old woman who had survived more than a village deserved to ask of her. When she spoke, her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I was beaten here yesterday," she said. "Many of you saw it." No one answered. "I was not beaten because I was guilty. I was beaten because too many people found it easier to believe shame than to ask who profits from it." A woman in the second row began crying quietly. Mama Zawadi continued, "Some of you repeated lies. Some of you feared lies. Some of you stayed silent because you thought silence keeps peace. It does not. It feeds cruelty." The words settled deep. Not only on the accused, on everyone. Kassim felt it move through the crowd like a reckoning wider than his own family. Then his mother turned toward the officers. "I will give my full statement," she said. "I will sign what is true. I will answer what is asked." Jelani's face changed for the first time into something like genuine fear. Because that was the true end of his power. Not the SUVs, not the lawyers, not the police. His victim had stopped protecting him. But then Mama Zawadi did something no one expected. She looked at Kassim, then at the officers, then back at the crowd. "When you do what must be done," she said, "do not drag the child through this market's mouth." The words were careful. Enough for Kassim, enough for the officers, enough to draw a line. The district officer nodded once. "Understood." Kassim felt his throat tighten. Even now, standing at the edge of justice, his mother was still choosing mercy with precision. Not toward the men who had harmed her, toward the one innocent life caught inside their web. The arrests began quietly after that. No handcuffs in the center lane, no dramatic forcing to the ground. The officers were too experienced for spectacle. They separated, the men took statements, escorted them toward the vehicles one by one. Omari tried to speak like an official until his voice cracked. Bwana Kito blustered until he realized no one was listening. Jelani said almost nothing at all. He kept glancing toward Kassim, as if still hoping blood might interrupt justice at the last minute. It did not. When the vehicles finally prepared to leave, the market remained unusually still. No bargaining, no shouting. Only the heavy silence of people watching power rearrange itself in front of them. Then from somewhere near the tomato stalls, an elderly woman stepped forward carrying a small basket. She stopped in front of Mama Zawadi and lowered her eyes. "I was wrong," she whispered. After her came another, and another. A fish seller, a tailor, the cassava woman who had laughed the day before. No grand speeches, just fragments. "Forgive me. I should have spoken. I believed lies. I was afraid." Kassim stood a little apart and watched it happen. He had imagined victory in harder colors, punishment, exposure, humiliation returned to sender. But this was something else. Smaller, truer. Community shame slowly bending toward repair. By late afternoon, work crews from the district had already arrived to photograph Mama Zawadi's house, document the conditions, and begin emergency repairs funded through Kassim's legal and charitable office. Temporary roofing sheets were unloaded. A doctor came to examine her. A social services woman took private notes and promised protective oversight. And before sunset, Kassim stood in the center of the market one final time and made an announcement no one there would forget. He would restore his mother's home. He would establish a fund in Metoni for elderly traders vulnerable to fraud and coercive debt. He would open a small legal aid office attached to the clinic road so no widow vendor or grandparent would again sign papers they could not read, while clerks and collectors fed on their ignorance. At that, the market broke not into noise but into tears, stunned silence, and the first fragile sense that justice might do more than punish. It might rebuild. When Kassim turned, he found Mama Zawadi watching him. Pride was in her face, but so was exhaustion. He walked to her at once and took her hand. For the first time since he had returned, the village no longer looked at her as prey. It looked at her as witness, and at him not merely as the son who had come home rich, but as the son who had finally understood what home had cost. The house sounded different after repairs. Not new, never new, just no longer wounded in the same places. When the evening wind moved across the roof now, it did not whistle through gaps or shake loose rust into the cooking area. Rain no longer threatened the bed. The front step had been reset. One cracked beam had been replaced. Fresh plaster covered the worst scars on the walls, though Kassim had asked the workers not to erase everything. Some marks, he said, were not damage. Some were memory. The first week after the arrests passed in a blur of official statements, signatures, district visits, and controlled gossip. Metoni had not become holy overnight. People still whispered. Curiosity still pressed at the edges of every silence. But the center had changed. No one touched Mama Zawadi now. No one shouted at her in the market. No one laughed when she walked past. And for the first time in years, people greeted her name before her shame. Kassim could have left. That thought came to him 3 times in those first days, and each time it disgusted him. He could have arranged better doctors in the city, better housing, better security, better everything. He could have put his mother in a quiet, beautiful home far from Metoni and called it Rescue. The old version of himself, the efficient man, the fix-it man, The one trained by wealth to mistake relocation for healing would have done exactly that. But Mama Zawadi did not need to be hidden somewhere comfortable, like a secret finally upgraded. She needed to be restored where she had been broken. So Kassim stayed. On the 9th evening after the workers had left and the final district vehicle had disappeared down the red road, the house settled into a quiet that felt almost sacred. The air smelled of onions frying in oil wood smoke, and the coriander one neighbor had shyly sent over as a peace offering. Crickets had begun their steady music outside. Somewhere beyond the mango tree, 2 children argued over a ball. The village sounded ordinary. That Kassim thought was the strangest miracle of all. He sat on a low stool near the doorway, peeling boiled cassava with his fingers, while Mama Zawadi stirred a pot over the fire. She refused to let him do all the work. He refused to let her do all of it alone. So they moved around one another in the kitchen with the awkwardness of people related by love, but separated by years. Neither knew yet how to be close without grief sitting between them. On a mat near the wall, Jabari was drawing in an old exercise book Kassim had brought from town. He used the pencil carefully, as though paper itself were expensive enough to deserve manners. Every so often he looked up at the adults, not nervously now, but attentively, still measuring, still learning the weather of this new arrangement. After the arrests, Kassim had insisted that no official statement, no public filing, and no local rumor would name the boy's parentage. The district officers had cooperated. The attorney had done more than that. He had buried the necessary protections beneath unrelated procedural language and temporary guardianship orders. On paper, Jabari was simply a child under household protection during an active fraud investigation. That was enough. The dead could answer to God. The living child would answer to no one. Mama Zawadi set the pot lid aside and glanced toward the mat. "Jabari, wash your hands." The boy nodded and slipped outside to the basin. For a moment, the house belonged only to mother and son. Kassim looked at her profile in the firelight. He had known this face all his life, yet now it contained histories he had never truly read. The lines beside her mouth were deeper. Her wrists were thinner. Her shoulders still carried a habit of bracing for impact, though the danger had been removed. But there was something else too, a quiet steadiness returning, as if dignity once defended was beginning to remember its own weight. "Mama," he said. She did not turn. "I have been thinking." That made her smile faintly. "Good. It is useful." He laughed under his breath, then grew serious again. "I want you to come with me to Nairobi for a while. Not forever. Just long enough for proper treatment. Full examinations. Rest. Real rest." She kept stirring. "You say not forever the way rich people say only a little, before changing everything. I am trying not to." "Yes. I know." He waited. At last she turned and looked at him fully. "I will go for treatment," she said, "but I will return." Relief loosened something in his chest. "All right. This is my home. I know." She studied him for a second as though testing whether he truly did. Then she said, "Do you—" The question was gentle. It still hit like truth. Kassim lowered his eyes to the cassava in his hands. Not enough. Not before. Mama Zawadi moved the pot away from the flame and came to sit opposite him. Firelight trembled across the repaired walls. Outside, Jabari splashed water at the basin. "For years," she said quietly, "I told myself that your silence meant success. That if you did not call often, it was because work was heavy. If your visits never came, it was because distance had raised the price." I used those thoughts to comfort myself. Shame rose hot in him. "But another part of me," she continued, "wondered if pain had become easier for you when you could not see it." Kassim swallowed. There was no defense. Not an honest one. "I thought money was presence," he said. She nodded once. "Many people do. I thought if I sent enough, then absence would hurt less. And did it? He looked up. No. Mama Zawadi rested her hands in her lap. You are not the only one who made a mistake. I mistook protection for silence. I kept telling myself I was saving you. Then I told myself I was saving the child. Then I told myself I was preserving what little dignity remained. Sometimes all three were true. Sometimes none of them were. Pain becomes clever when it wants to survive. Kassim stared at her. That was what made her different from everyone else in this story, he realized. Even now, after all she had endured, she was still capable of naming her own errors, without surrendering the moral truth of why she had made them. I am angry with him, Kassim said. Jelani? Yes. Mama Zawadi did not answer immediately. He is your brother, she said at last, but not because blood made him good. Kassim's mouth tightened. I don't know what to do with that. You do not need to know tonight. I wanted him punished. Then I wanted him erased. Then I looked at Jabari and hated that even my anger could become dangerous if I wasn't careful. She nodded slowly. That is how evil spreads. It teaches pain to stop making distinctions. Kassim sat with that. Outside, Jabari returned, dried his hands on his shorts, and stopped at the doorway, as if sensing he was approaching a serious conversation. Mama Zawadi opened her arm without a word. The boy went to her at once and leaned lightly against her side. Kassim watched them together and felt again the enormous, strange tenderness at the center of all this suffering. A betrayed wife. A dead husband's hidden child. A mother who had chosen mercy in the one place where bitterness would have been easier. There were moments when the whole thing felt almost too human to bear. Jabari looked at Kassim. Will the bad men come back? The question was direct in the way only children could manage. Kassim set the cassava aside. No. Jabari searched his face. How do you know? Because they are being watched now. Because the law is involved. Because I am here. The boy nodded, thinking about each piece separately. Then he asked the question Kassim had dreaded, without knowing he dreaded it. Will you leave silence settled? The crickets outside seemed louder. Mama Zawadi did not rescue him. She let the question stand. Kassim looked at the child's small face, then at his mother, then back again. I will travel. Sometimes, he said carefully. My work is still there, but I will not disappear. Jabari considered that. Promise yes. The boy held out his little finger solemnly. Something inside Kassim nearly broke and healed at the same time. He hooked his finger with the child's. Promise. That seemed to satisfy him. Jabari returned to his exercise book and began drawing again 3 figures. This time one taller than the others, standing in front of a house with a roof that did not leak. Mama Zawadi noticed too. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Later, after they ate, after dishes were washed, after the fire had burned low and the village had quieted into night, Kassim stepped outside alone. The stars above Matoni were sharper than the city's stars. Not brighter, perhaps, just less interrupted. He stood in the yard and let the dark settle around him. This was where he had once dreamed of escape. This was where his mother had once stood after selling ancestral land to buy him freedom. This was where Jelani's envy had ripened into predation. This was where silence had nearly become inheritance. And now this was where healing imperfect and slow had chosen to begin. Behind him, the door opened. Mama Zawadi stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. It is cold, she said. He smiled faintly. A little. She came to stand beside him. For a while they said nothing. Then Kassim spoke into the dark. I used to think returning home meant arriving with enough success that no one could question what I had become. Mama Zawadi looked at him. But that wasn't return, he said. That was performance. Real return is this. He turned toward her. Seeing what I did not want to see. Hearing what I should have heard years ago. Standing inside the damage instead of sending money around it. His mother's face softened. Yes, she said. That is return. Kassim bowed his head. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, just with the humility of a son who had finally stopped mistaking achievement for understanding. And when Mama Zawadi placed her hand on his head, the gesture was so old, so tender, so absolute, that for one trembling second he was not a billionaire, not a rescuer, not a man of influence or consequence. He was only her child, only the boy she had paid for with land tears, silence, and stubborn hope. Inside the house, Jabari's sleepy voice called out for water. Mama Zawadi smiled through her tears. Family never lets grief finish a sentence. Kassim laughed softly, wiped his face, and followed her back inside. The repaired house glowed with firelight. 3 bowls sat on the table, and for the first time in many years what waited inside was not survival. It was home. Life rarely breaks us in one loud moment. More often it wounds us slowly through silence, pride, and the things people decide not to ask. Kassim believed that sending money home was enough. Mama Zawadi believed that enduring pain alone was a form of protection. Jelani believed that bitterness could justify betrayal. And the village believed that silence kept peace. All of them were wrong. This story reminds us that love without truth can become distance. Truth without courage can arrive too late. Family is not proven by love. It is proven by sacrifice, responsibility, the willingness to protect the innocent, even when your own heart has been deeply wounded. Mama Zawadi carried more pain than anyone could ever carry, yet she refused to let that pain poison her child. That is a kind of strength the world rarely celebrates enough. Justice also matters. Forgiveness does not mean allowing evil to continue. Mercy does not mean protecting cruelty from consequences. Real healing begins when lies are exposed. The weak are defended. Dignity is restored where shame once ruled. But even then, healing is not easy. It is built in small acts, a repaired room, a shared meal, a kept promise, a hand placed gently on a bowed head. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What part touched you the most? What would you have done if you were Kassim? If you believe stories about justice, family, and second chances still matter, subscribe, and stay with us for more.